What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel, Morgan Allena True Crime and Mystery. Today we are going to be going over some information that was released in a recent FOIA request that was acquired by Into the Weeds podcast. These records are going to be reviewing Nicholas Godejohn's criminal appeal that he had filed, which was basically due to having ineffective counsel and a lack of calling expert witnesses, failing to present necessary evidence to ensure that he had a fair trial. Honestly, when I was reading through these documents, it was just unbelievably sad how unfair and how unjust Nicholas Godejohn was treated. He was not granted a fair trial whatsoever, and it's so incredibly important to have this information. And I know it's probably going to be difficult for some of you guys, especially those of you that have loved ones or friends that are on the autism spectrum. And I think this is why it's so incredibly important, because this could happen to somebody that you love. If you or somebody that you know struggles with autism, Asperger's, any mental health issues in general, you're at risk. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. I think people tend to think if they're just watching over their family members, especially the higher level autism, the higher the level diagnosis, the more you really have to pay attention and ensure that child or your family member is being safe, because other people will 100% take advantage. In Nicholas Godejohn's case, that is exactly what happened. He was taken advantage of by Gypsy Rose, by those around him, the police, the attorneys. Everybody failed him, honestly, and it's so incredibly sad, but his case is not unique, and it's truly unfair. That's why we need to talk about this. So with that being said, before we get into reviewing the records, I want to give a very special thank you to Into the Weeds podcast for going out of their way and getting the FOIA request done. Again, I have mentioned this a million times. It is not cheap to do that. It is incredibly expensive, actually. And going out of your way and filling out the request and sending them and waiting for this material just so that we can have it and we can be exposed to the truth, or content creators can put it out. It is incredibly generous, and I am so incredibly thankful to you, Into the Weeds podcast. And I believe I saw somewhere that you guys I may be wrong on this, starting a crowdfunding type of thing where you're trying to get the remaining files, get the other FOIA requests done. I want to say I saw it was like $500 a piece per set. So guys, if you are interested in anything like that and you want to see these other records be put out, go check out Into the Weeds and you can see if they have some other information about that. So that way we can get all this information out there. And again, I want to say thank you to you guys and to anybody that has requested these documents. I know I couldn't do it, so without you guys, none of us would be able to see these records. So thank you for everything, helping everybody to see the truth for what it actually is, especially in exposing Gypsy Rose Blanchard for who she is. Before we get into anything though, make sure to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button if you have not already, so that way you can keep up with any new videos that I put out and stay up to date with my channel. Thank you guys and all my viewers that are helping support me and my channel. You guys are awesome. Let's get into these Nicholas Godejohn criminal appeal FOIA documents and be prepared to be incredibly ashamed of our justice system. So these records that I'm going to attach, I'm also going to put a link down in the description box. I don't know if anybody ever reads that, but a lot of the times I'll put links and stuff down in there. I'm going to attach the link to these specific FOIA documents. It is 417 pages worth of information for you. If you want to check it out on your own, feel free to do that. I'm going to be going through some of the details that I missed. So I went over a couple things last week on a video that I made about Gypsy, going through some of the details of videos that she sent and other things. But this video is just going to be things that I haven't touched on yet because I don't like to be repetitive. So we're going to go through some things that are just incredibly alarming. There is a lot of information. These are just, it's just unreal. The big part of this is basically the lack of evidence that was in this case presented at Nick's trial. So you'll be reading these records to kind of help you understand. This is him going back and saying that he did not have adequate attorneys. They did not represent him in a way that made it to where he received a fair trial. That is our right as an American citizen. So basically, there were multiple items seized from Nicholas Godejohn's home, one of which was a camera that included a 4 gigabyte memory SD card. This camera was never inspected by the trial counsel, and it was never presented during the trial, nor was it searched whatsoever. They do have it in custody. It is in, I believe, the hands of the police department or wherever they keep their evidence. But they went back in this criminal appeal to try to get this information and see what is located on that camera. And they were denied. This was during this appeal, and that's what it says in these documents, that they were denied the ability to research and look into what was on this camera. I'm sure all of us, knowing what Gypsy Rose liked to film and the things she liked to do, it wouldn't be surprising that a good majority of the information, if there's anything on there, would be videos like that. But if you guys remember, Gypsy also was filming certain videos about the house, and she had made multiple videos, including the one where she went into Dee Dee's bedroom and made that certain motion to indicate where Nick was to go, because due to Nick's autism diagnosis, he literally needed step-by-step instructions.
Did Gypsy know that you were going to kill her mother?
Honestly, she asked me to.
Why did she ask you to do that?
Because she felt it was her only way to be with me.
Okay.
How did Nick know when to do this crime, time-wise, that morning?
I told him.
Who planned this?
I did.
I only used the one card that I have over you. Gypsy.
He didn't understand the whole entire concept of what it actually takes to commit something like this. He didn't get it. He tried to research things, and that was something that was very common that Nicholas Godejohn would do. You would say a word that he didn't know, he'd be Googling it. Things like that. That's why he had to look up the person Charles Manson. He didn't automatically know who that person was. And so whenever he did look up this Charles Manson character, it really offended him, probably because Charlie Manson really appears kind of crazy. And that probably hurt Nick's feelings that Gypsy was comparing Nicholas Godejohn to Charles Manson. And of course, she was probably doing it, I would say, to offend him. Honestly, she took her time into looking into certain individuals, Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson, and she said that to hurt him, and it did. But he had to look it up first to be able to understand it. But this camera, the state refused to search it, claiming that it had no legal authority to do so and that it would require probable cause, although they had already acquired a warrant at that time, like in the beginning, for all the social media and all the devices. They did not search it at that time, so still to this day, that camera remains unsearched and we do not know what's on it. Huge red flag. Because we all know that Gypsy Rose Blanchard sent so many videos. There was so much evidence that was admitted into this trial, but it wasn't even, a good majority of it was not even presented in Nick's defense. A lot of the videos that Gypsy was taking was not presented in a way that was actually beneficial to what Nicholas Godejohn's defense needed. So that was denied after they filed that in the appeal, saying that this could have a lot of evidence that could change the case. Typically, whenever you're going to file an appeal, you have to meet certain things which will grant you an appeal, which Nicholas Godejohn really did meet the standard that is needed to qualify for an appeal in his case. But again, I think a lot of people think that it's really incredibly easy to get an appeal or to file an appeal and be granted that. It is really not. It is very difficult. Once you are sentenced to something in prison, it is very, very, very difficult to get a new trial, to get any sort of different circumstance to happen that could affect your case, because the state doesn't like to waste money on it. That's why it's important to get the job done correctly as much as you can the first time. And even if the state makes mistakes or they give an unfair trial, they don't really have to grant you the right to a new trial. So it's incredibly difficult. And I just feel like Nick was so screwed over in this. It is horrible. So basically, Nick's original defense trial attorney put in a diminished capacity defense. So basically, he didn't have the ability to deliberate as needed in order to commit the crime or be entirely responsible for the crime that occurred. Using this defense, you have a duty as an attorney to call qualified experts to testify on defendant's behalf to show why this is a good defense for them to have. You have to show that it is important and that it made a difference in this crime that occurred. So basically, Nicholas Godejohn was diagnosed as having level 2 autism. He was diagnosed as early as in the 2nd grade. And it said that the council made the decision to go with this defense yet failed to retain competent qualified experts. And in Missouri, there are 2 defenses that are typically confused a lot of the time, one of which is the insanity plea and diminished capacity. So those are 2 different things. So the first is formally called not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, excluding responsibility. The second is a diminished capacity defense. So these are very different. The insanity, if accepted, would absolve the defendant of all personal responsibility of the circumstance surrounding the alleged incident. And then because it is an affirmative defense, there are certain time frames in which the defendant must notify the prosecution that they intend to claim this defense. And then the other one is diminished capacity, which is what they went on Nicholas Godejohn's trial. It would negate a necessary mental element of the crime that is charged. So, for example, if the defense is accepted, the defendant could be convicted of second-degree murder or manslaughter and so forth, instead of first-degree murder. The state also maintains the burden of proving the mental state of the crime charged beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense merely provides evidence that could impact their ability to reach their burden. So that is how the defense was described in the Missouri case State v. Anderson. And this area of law is very tricky, and you have to absolutely have professionals, experts in the area to evaluate the defendant and testify according to their findings. And they did not call somebody that could testify appropriately to their findings because the guy that they called, Dr. Franks, was not qualified to testify on behalf of Nicholas Godejohn in the way that he needed for his defense. So autism level 2, and I'm going to go ahead and say it right now, I am not an expert in autism spectrum disorder. I will never claim to be. I only know what I know, but I will never claim to be somebody as a know-it-all or anything like that. It is very complex, and it's called a spectrum for a reason. It can go a large variety of ways. So just because somebody has a certain characteristic type of display of their autism doesn't mean it's the same for everybody. And according to Dr. Franks, who evaluated Mr. Godejohn, he was diagnosed with autism spectrum level 2, requiring substantial support with accompanying an intellectual impairment. October 11, 2016, trial counsel informed the court that the defense in this case would not be NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity, but that Mr. Godejohn did not have a state of mind, which is an element of the offense deliberation in this case. Since counsel knew that Mr. Godejohn had been diagnosed with autism as a child and Asperger's syndrome in high school, and that Mr. Godejohn's relationship with Gypsy Blanchard was an important aspect of the case in regard to whether or not Mr. Godejohn was actually able to deliberate at the time of the offense, it was incumbent on counsel to investigate and present evidence from a qualified neuropsychologist who had expertise and experience in the area of the autism spectrum disorder and Asperger's syndrome. Instead, counsel chose to keep Dr. Franks on the case and call him to testify to Mr. Godejohn's mental disease or defect and his ability to deliberate at the time of the offense at the trial. Dr. Franks' report did not mention anything about the defendant's ability to form the mental intent required to commit the crime. Offer of proof hearing was held on whether or not Dr. Franks could testify at the trial. During the hearing, the court asked the state whether or not they thought Dr. Franks was an expert. Mr. Patterson answered, "I think in this particular case there are grave issues with that, and his testimony is more likely to mislead the jury about things given his lack of knowledge on the specific topic he's been called to testify about." At the close of the hearing, the state argued that Dr. Franks was not qualified to render an expert opinion on the issue of diminished capacity. Mr. Patterson stated on the record that Dr. Franks does not know what deliberation means under Missouri law and that he was not qualified to testify as an expert in regard to a diminished capacity defense because Dr. Franks was simply not qualified on the issue and does not understand what he's talking about. But Dr. Franks was still called as an expert at trial in the defense's case in chief. And Dr. Franks does not have any practical experience or training in evaluating or treating individuals with autism spectrum disorder and has not published any articles or books relating to autism spectrum disorder, so he couldn't be called an expert whatsoever. And whenever Dr. Franks was asked to tell the jury about his experiences in working with people with autism spectrum disorder, this is what he said. Well, it wasn't added into the DSM until 1944, and so the disorder has been known since the 1940s, but as research has accumulated, it's become much more. Clinicians are looking for it more than we used to because there's a lot more known about it. And so in the work I do evaluating people for the courts, I've learned how to administer tests, I've learned how to identify it, and I've gone to training to increase my knowledge about the disorder over the last 10 years. Dr. Franks is giving the equivalent of watching a YouTube video one time and then saying you're an expert in it. Like, I've watched a video about how to replace an engine in a vehicle, but that doesn't mean I actually know how to do it. But they still called him, and that was basically what he did. He just parroted information from the DSM-5, and he was clearly not an actual expert in the field. And they actually chosen somebody that was qualified and an actual expert. They would have been able to tell the jury about how people with autism spectrum disorder are greatly and extremely susceptible to social manipulation and suggestion by virtue of the following characteristics. 1, a greater need for emotional intimacy, both romantic and otherwise, the fragile nature of their developing relationships, social impairment, empathy imbalance, the deficit of cognitive empathy, which is being able to understand and predict others' mental state, but a surplus of emotional empathy, which is the capacity for attachment, and hyper-focus on a narrow range of interest. An expert neuropsychologist specializing in autism spectrum disorder or Asperger's would have explained to the jury at trial how these recognized and accepted characteristics combined with Gypsy Rose Blanchard's methodical manipulation of Nicholas over a 2.5-year period resulted in Nicholas's inability to deliberate at the time of the offense. That you cannot separate Nicholas Godejohn from his autistic diagnosis. So he is always going to be autistic. You cannot separate the two. He would further have testified that Nicholas's autism combined with Gypsy's requests of him and her planning resulted in Nicholas surrendering his deliberation to Gypsy by taking what she said as fact. For example, ending her mother's life was the only way that they could be together, and that it was up to Nicholas to rescue her from the situation. And operating as such, Nicholas surrendered to Gypsy Rose Blanchard.
He was enjoying it.
And by having an expert at the trial testifying for Nicholas Godejohn, after looking at the evidence and taking everything into account, they would have had the ability to have a rebuttal to the state's professional that they had, which was Dr. Denny, because he gave a testimony regarding autism that was very misleading and oftentimes incorrect. So they would have had a way to combat Dr. Denny whenever he referred to Nicholas Godejohn as mildly autistic or autism level 1, which implies to a layperson that the autism was hardly a factor at all and could be discounted. In fact, he used some version of the term mild over a dozen times in his testimony. So you have Nicholas Godejohn, who is on Social Security disability because his autism is so severe that he cannot maintain a job or live as what a typical individual would in society. And you have this qualified expert sitting there saying he's pretty mild overall, it's no big deal. And his defense did not have any way to refute this because they didn't call on anybody that's actually qualified to testify on Nicholas Godejohn's behalf. So imagine if that was you or your child and you see that they have all these problems day to day and they can't do things as everybody else does because of their diagnosis, and then they're sitting on the stand for a crime and they're just playing it off as it's no big deal. When you know on a day-to-day basis he has struggles. Every little daily living task is a struggle for him to do. That would be so incredibly infuriating. Levels of autism is basically in reference to how much support the individual needs. So quoting him as a level 1 means he needs very limited support at home. And that's exactly the opposite, because less than 7 months prior to the offense, Nicholas's mother, Stephanie, Stephanie Goldhammer completed a Social Security benefits form in regard to Nicholas Godejohn's disability, titled Social Function Report, Adult Third Party. In this report, Stephanie wrote that Nick had a lot of concentration issues and problems. He's not comfortable around people, sometimes seems to have problems grasping, quote, the real world. She reports that Nicholas doesn't understand why you need to take a shower, why you need to clean your room. Nicholas's mother also reports that Nicholas is not capable of cooking an oven-prepared meal. She reports that on the form that the computer is a lot of his connection to people, but he is always to himself. In addition, the prosecutor asked Dr. Denny if he had published a paper with regard to autism, and he responded, yes, I have. The one paper is also listed in Dr. Denny's curriculum, is put into evidence at trial as State's Exhibit number 187. The paper is entitled An Estimate of the Prevalence of Autism Spectrum Disorders in Incarcerated Population. That the fact that Dr. Denny's name is third in line on his particular research paper, and it does not make him an expert in the area of autism spectrum disorders either. So of course the state's going to qualify somebody that's not super qualified because they don't really need to. They want somebody that's testifying to make their case better. So it doesn't really matter if they have an expert, but for somebody that is defending literally themselves against life in prison, you better make sure that you have somebody that is an actual expert in the field that they're testifying for. So had they called an expert, it would have allowed them to show that Nicholas Godejohn's autism diagnosis precluded him from having the ability to deliberate. It would have concluded to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty that Nicholas Godejohn suffered from a mental disease or defect at the time of the offense, and that due to his disorder, he was not capable of deliberating or a cool reflection at the time of the crime. So that's what the deliberation means. It's a period, like a cool reflection period, basically looking over everything and like what it is, deliberating, taking the time to think it out, process it, and going for it regardless. Nicholas Godejohn did not have that ability due to the fact that he was brainwashed and manipulated by Gypsy Rose Blanchard for 2.5 years prior, and his autism diagnosis did not allow him the ability, literally, he did not have the ability to deliberate in the way that a person would need to commit such an act. And the state was able to say things that the defense did not bring anything against. So they said in their closing statements that absolutely, as you heard as part of the facts, that Gypsy did have a role. She was the one to ask the defendant to kill her mom, but we have to be careful and separate what is collaboration versus what is manipulation. Because there could be this sense that because Gypsy was the one that asked the defendant, somehow she manipulated the defendant into killing her mom. Let's think about that for a minute. Think about manipulation. It requires some kind of deception. I want to steal a car, so I tell you, hey, see that car over there? The owner said I could have it. It's okay. Could you just go get it for me? That's manipulation, because we're deceiving versus, hey, that car over there, I want to steal it. Do you want to do it for me? That's not manipulation. She asked him, but he said yes. And if you think about it in a way, Gypsy asked in the least manipulative way because she couldn't lie at all. She put it all out there. She didn't try to do it through innuendo. She didn't make up things. She just said, this is what's happening to me. Will you kill my mom? There's no manipulation there because ultimately it was the defendant's decision. Nothing was holding him back. And if anything was evident from the dynamic of their relationship that you saw in the Facebook, in the text messages, in the interview, and in Gypsy's testimony, Nicholas Godejohn not made to ever do anything Nicholas Godejohn did not want to do. Which we can all see that's not the truth by when Gypsy's telling him, I can do all of these things, but I can't unalive my mom. See, I can hurt anybody, I can steal anything and do anything and everything except do this to my mom. She was manipulating him from the very beginning. And had they called qualified experts in this field, they would have been able to come against that statement and show that that is not actually true, and it was 100% manipulation by Gypsy Rose. Not only that, Nicholas Godejohn was not given right that extends the plea bargaining process, which is unreal. So during the plea negotiations, defendants are entitled to effective assistance of competent counsel. Mr. Godejohn, Nick, wrote a letter and it said, today when we were at court, you told me that the prosecutor was not interested at this time in any plea agreement. What I would like to know is exactly how this conversation went, as close as you can recall, just so I understand in my mind where he's coming from. If there is a possibility that in the future this may be something he would consider, I would like to know if it means this is still an option or possibility. This memo states that Mr. Godejohn rejected that offer but did want counsel to make a counter offer of 15 years on a reduced charge of murder in the second degree and 15 years on armed criminal action to run concurrent. The state made a second plea offer to Mr. Godejohn. The first one was life with parole eligibility on a plea to murder in the second degree with the dismissal of the armed criminal action. So life with parole. The second one was life probation denied with parole on a charge of murder in the second degree with 10 years consecutive on the armed criminal action charge. So it was clear that Nicholas was open to taking a plea, but it was incumbent then on counsel to engage in a meaningful negotiation with the state in order to get the best plea offer possible. An important aspect of plea negotiations is presenting mitigating evidence about the crime and about the defendant to the state to support an argument for a plea to a lesser charge with a lower sentence. So whenever I'm talking about Gypsy Rose Blanchard and how I believe that Mike Stanfield, at the time that they went to go negotiate a plea, which was very soon after Mommy Dead and Dearest, and obviously going with the Munchausen syndrome by proxy defense, he presented this evidence in that meeting with the state prosecutor in order to negotiate that incredibly soft plea deal that Gypsy got. And obviously, I'm telling you about how he said in the documentary, whenever Dee Dee put her hands over Gypsy's ears and then called her mentally delayed, that's not actually what happened. He could have easily been misrepresenting what the medical records actually showed. And with that being said, I think he managed to talk the state into offering Gypsy that deal because of this information. Whether it was 100% true or they had been able to actually go through all of the records, I feel like had they been able to actually sit and review every single bit of evidence, I don't know how they could have arrived at that deal. I just really don't. And it's just, I know it was politically motivated, but I don't think that was the sole purpose of it. Honestly, I just think people didn't know the information. They very easily could have been releasing information to the public. But again, with Mommy Dead and Dearest and Dr. Phil and all these things coming out around that time, it absolutely helped Gypsy's case by getting her side of the story that she made up out to the public to sway the public opinion. And I think that is why they were so concerned about actually taking it to trial, because all it takes is one juror to hold down on a not guilty or whatever, and you got a hung jury. So I think that's what they were afraid of. But in Nicholas Godejohn's case, nobody even bargained or negotiated anything for him. He got offered life twice. What kind of plea deal is that? He never got the same deal as what Gypsy Rose got. He didn't even get like a similar deal. It was literally life both times. Yeah, he had the opportunity for parole, but still, that's what he wanted. He wanted to be treated fairly the same way that Gypsy did, because it's not fair that he got this and Gypsy got 10 years. And he didn't understand. That's why he's questioning at this time, like, did they mean like forever, or what is exactly, like, what do you exactly mean when you're saying these specific words? Tell me exactly what he said as close as you can remember it, so I know exactly what it is, because he's trying to understand. He doesn't get the little nuances and things when people are speaking. Another thing is that they had a list of all the people that visited Nicholas Godejohn in prison, yet they did not even formally interview any of these people that know Nicholas Godejohn and know his background, know the way that he grew up, in order to understand his life experiences and understand anything about him or certain struggles that he has. They didn't interview him or ask him any questions at all, which would have been beneficial to him during the trial. Had they been able to look into Nick's background, they would have known that Nicholas had a very traumatic birth. The umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck twice. Suction cups were used to assist in his birth. He looked blue when he was born. He had to be resuscitated by medical personnel. He also had a very violent upbringing. It says that Nicholas witnessed physical violence during the time that his mother was in a relationship with his father, Robert Godejohn, and that Robert Godejohn continued to be physically violent with the mother, Stephanie Goldhammer, even after the relationship ended. Additionally, counsel would have known that Stephanie Goldhammer's subsequent boyfriends after Nicholas's father were also violent. Nicholas witnessed much of the violence that occurred between his mother and his father, as well as between his mother and her subsequent boyfriends growing up. They would know that he had a very difficult time making friends at school and that he played mostly with his cousins and other family members. Nicholas got along with his cousins for the most part when he was younger, but they all knew that he was different. Counsel would have also known that Nicholas attended religious Catholic classes during times that he would be at his father's house, and in those classes he had to have special one-to-one instruction because of his disabilities, which was not the norm for these classes. Had they obtained mental health records from Waukesha County Jail, counsel would have known that the mental health providers at the jail indicated that Nicholas did not seem to know the gravity of the situation that he was in. He was depressed and confused. On June 17, 2015, one day after his statement to police, when asked about his concerns about his ability to cope while incarcerated, Nicholas responded that he was mainly concerned about his girlfriend. Nicholas stated, "The only reason I did what I did was to be with my girlfriend." Further observations by mental health providers at the jail indicate the patient presents nervous, slightly confused at contact, seems very grateful to have some of the jail process explained in detail. Patient presents vulnerable and is tearful when discussing his charges. In the mental health records, it also states that on June 23, 2015, Mr. Godejohn stated that since he's been able to read his court documents, he understands what's happening with his case and indicated that his girlfriend was definitely a trigger for his OCD. The record also reflected that Mr. Godejohn said that he mainly gets obsessed with things but doesn't list compulsions. The records quote Mr. Godejohn as saying, "Before I didn't understand the severity of the situation until I had time to think." In his defense's failure, them not being able to present a defense that basically Nicholas Godejohn gave up his Miranda rights, so it was involuntary because he didn't have the capacity to actually understand the rights that he had. So you have to be able to understand and then voluntarily give up your right to remain silent. But if you don't understand it in the first place, you don't have the ability to even voluntarily give up your Miranda rights. Nicholas Godejohn, sitting in that interrogation room, was not able to understand the fact that he needed to let them know that he had an intellectual impairment. He did not have that ability to actually understand what was going on. And it's important because whenever Gypsy was in that room, she was sitting there. Nicholas was sitting handcuffed in a seat for 15 hours before the detective even began interrogating him. And that was shortly after midnight by the time that the detective even began to talk to him about things. And he was telling people that he was, confused and that he just felt out of it. He kept talking to himself and believed that the police were, quote, doing everything to help. That's what he kept saying. They're doing everything to help us. He really did not understand that the police were not there to help him, but to investigate and charge him criminally. The detective had not been given information that Nicholas was autistic. She did not glean that he might have been diminished to some degree in his capacity to understand the questions. The detective was unaware whether Greene County has any policy on reading Miranda warnings to people who might have trouble understanding or interviewing someone who is autistic. She received no training in encounters with people who are autistic. Nicholas told her that he was tired and felt loopy from being awake for so long. The entirety of Nicholas's 15-hour detention was recorded on 5 DVDs that were admitted and viewed by the trial court as part of the motion to suppress hearing. And although the defense tried to get that video suppressed, after the videos ended, they didn't even ask any questions and they didn't call any witnesses. The state said that they had 1,000 questions, and the trial court pointed out that the court had no evidence of Mr. Godejohn's education, physical, or mental condition, and no evidence on how his mental disorder affected his ability to understand the Miranda warning. Nicholas was held handcuffed, and in the small interview room, his emotional condition was compromised. During much of the time, he exhibited worry and concern about Gypsy's well-being, repeatedly asking officers about her condition. He made multiple inquiries to law enforcement as to whether he would be able to physically hold Gypsy, and the officers held that possibility open, never definitively answering him, which caused further distress and distraction to Nicholas. On the video, Nicholas tells an officer that obviously I know you and every one of the people in the sheriff's department is doing all you guys can to help me and her. Nicholas had to sit at a table the entire time. He was not given a blanket to shield himself from the cold. hours with bare feet, shorts, and a short sleeve shirt. He was bound with handcuffs for 12 hours and 53 minutes before the interrogation began. The video reflects that Corporal Mahoney sought to minimize the impact of warnings by assuring Nicholas that they were going to talk and she would tell him about Gypsy after they did the waiver first. The context of their discussion renders it unclear as to whether Nicholas fully understood whether he was asked to waive his rights as a criminal suspect, and his statement should have been suppressed. Corporal Mahoney also takes advantage of Nicholas's preoccupation and emotional distress involving Gypsy by stating to him, if you love Gypsy, you're not going to let her get in trouble. Do you want to do the right thing by Gypsy if you love her? And this is the point where you're going to prove that you do love her when me and you talk. Coupled with Nicholas's impairment and the interrogation by Corporal Mahoney illustrates Nicholas's inability to knowingly relinquish or abandon his rights. He had to be directed to fill out the biographical information on the Miranda form with help and instruction from Corporal Mahoney. Nicholas is able to recognize the Miranda rights from television but shows no sign of comprehending them. She tells him to initial each of the rights after they individually are read to him, and Nicholas asks if he can initial at the end of the document because there is only one signature line. His autism caused him to focus on the systematic order of the form's completion rather on the substance of what was contained in the form itself. So he is more concerned about actually where they're telling him to sign because there's only one area for him to sign, like when he's looking at it, and that's what he's concerned about, and not actually understanding that he's literally giving up his rights to remain silent. Nicholas Godejohn is sitting there and not understanding that, yeah, he has the right to remain silent, but he's not fully entirely processing that every single word that's coming out of his mouth is going to be used against him to put him in prison. That's not registering for him because he can't focus on anything but how the actual form looks. He doesn't understand that he really needs an attorney because he is going to be criminally prosecuted and tried because of his autism diagnosis. So it really didn't matter to him whether or not he's giving up his Miranda rights because he's not fully understanding the importance of them. And had they actually had an expert there testifying on Nicholas Godejohn's behalf, they would have been able to sit there and say, to understand the Miranda rights as they're given to you, you have to have the ability or the cognitive understanding of reading at a 7th grade level. Nicholas's reading ability per his senior year IEP was between 5th and 6th grade. So he read at a 5th and 6th grade level, and you have to have at least a 7th grade reading comprehension level to be able to understand the Miranda rights. They would have been able to present that at trial on Nicholas Godejohn's behalf in his defense, but they literally failed him. They failed him in every single way. So he has a 5th grade reading level, so he can't understand. He doesn't understand. It's so unfair to him. And another thing that just literally blew my mind as I was reading this was the fact that, as we all know, everybody has the right to a trial by jury, and those people on the jury have to be impartial. They don't have any prejudice against you or have their mind made up about the case when they're going into it. So they can't have anything like that, right? You have to be indifferent as a juror. And they literally screwed him so bad on the jury. And it's honestly, I can't even believe it. It's hard to even put into words how unfortunate it really was. It says that whenever the community from which jurors are drawn is sufficiently poisoned either by adverse publicity or by the effects of the very events at issue, or both, a presumption of prejudice among potential jurors arises, and that requires a change of venue. If the area is so overblown by the media and it's on every single news station and every newspaper, you have to a reasonable degree understand that even though a juror may say they have the ability to be impartial, it's very difficult to actually be impartial when you're seeing things and you live in the area and you already have your mind made up because it's all in your face, right? And in this case, the publicity that was surrounding Nicholas Godejohn's case was extremely intense, Pre-trial public scrutiny and fascination was very high due to the unusual underlying facts of the case, including an aspect of Munchausen syndrome by proxy perpetuated by the victim in the case. Gypsy pled guilty to second-degree murder on July 5th, 2016. Her court proceedings were broadcast on television and made available on demand online. Co-defendant gave television interviews to Dr. Phil in 2020 that aired over a 3-day period prior to Nicholas Godejohn's trial. Multiple videos regarding the case were available on YouTube through ABC News, Law and Crime Network, Dr. Phil, and in addition, HBO aired an hour-and-a-half special on May 16th, 2017 titled Mommy Dead and Dearest, which contained extremely prejudicial content, including information on Nicholas's prior arrest record, actual footage of court proceedings, and discovery from the underlying case, including Nick's interview with law enforcement. And 2 days before jury selection began, Investigation Discovery aired an hour-and-a-half long special titled Gypsy's Revenge, which also made claims like Nicholas Godejohn had a criminal past. And the show aired a segment from KY3 broadcast which revealed that Nicholas was arrested in 2013 after investigators say he was watching pornography and fondling himself in a McDonald's restaurant for 9 hours. It went on to allege that police found a large knife on his person during the arrest. In addition to prejudicial and inadmissible information about a prior arrest, the show contained a mind-boggling array of prejudicial content, including extrajudicial statements by co-defendant Gypsy Blanchard about the event, including her recollection of how horrific it was to listen to the murder, and about statements allegedly made by Nicholas Godejohn. Actual discovery from the underlying case, including photographs taken by the Greene County Sheriff's Office, surveillance videos, photographs not admitted into trial, law enforcement video, interviews not admitted into trial, victim impact information, including a video footage of Dee Dee Blanchard as a child, teenager, young mother, interviews with her siblings, a reenactment of the scene of the crime, including a simulation of the victim's screams, actual video footage of co-defendant Gypsy Blanchard's plea and details of her sentencing, commentary from the co-defendant's counsel, commentary from the prosecuting attorney that Gypsy's sentence was appropriate based on mitigation around the 2 decades of abuse that she suffered at the victim's hands, prejudicial commentary by neighbors and journalists that Nicholas was an internet predator and mastermind. Nicholas's booking photo, actual footage of Nicholas handcuffed in court. All of these things were just days before the jury was selected for his trial. And then the question of whether a fair and impartial jury could be seated at Greene County due to the level of publicity received in this case was discussed at several different points in the pre-trial procedure. As early as January 11, 2016, Holden expressed concern about the ability to seat a jury in Greene County. And on November 8, 2018, approximately 80 people were called for potential service. So the trial court asked the panel if they had heard from any sources or read from any source or seen anything on television, the internet about this case, the trial, or Mr. Godejohn prior to the meeting. So many potential jurors raised their hands, the trial court reversed the question and asked how many had not heard anything about the case. Only 13 people responded, meaning 67 out of 80, or approximately 84% of people had heard about the case. So imagine that. Imagine you're going to trial and you're facing life in prison, and 87% of all the potential people that are on that group for your jury that they have to pick from already know about you and everything that they've put online, whether it's true or not. Because clearly it wasn't. I mean, we've all watched the documentaries and we see how manipulative and dishonest they were in presenting the information. Would you be willing to risk your life or put your life on the line for people that already have their mind made up about you? Unbelievable. The trial court then inquired of the 67 who had heard about the case, how many formed an opinion as to Mr. Godejohn's guilt or innocence, to which 19, or roughly 1/3 of people, responded affirmatively. Despite these astonishing numbers, trial counsel failed to move to quash the entire panel and request a change of venue for cause. So they didn't even ask to go to a new place to get different jurors. Unbelievable. All 12 jurors that sat on the jury panel that found Nick Godejohn guilty were exposed to pre-trial publicity about the case. All 12. 3 jurors, number 13, 20, and 39, expressed that they had already made up their mind about guilt or innocent based on pre-trial publicity. So you're going to start your trial and you've already got 3 people on there that's already made up their mind about you. It's like outrageous to me. That is unreal. Trial counsel failed to inquire of all jurors the extent of the exposure of pretrial publicity and explore the bias of the jurors who expressed that they had already formed an opinion of guilt or innocence, which we've all watched the documentaries. We know how it's framed. So how difficult would it be to say that more than likely, I would bet anything, that they already assumed him to be guilty? Because that's the way all of those documentaries were framed and set up as, which violated Nicholas Godejohn's right to a fair and impartial trial. The right to a jury trial guarantees a fair trial by a panel of impartial, indifferent jurors. How can you do that whenever you've got 80% of all the people that already made their mind up about you and already heard and learned everything about the case? And they didn't even challenge it. They didn't even try to get the venue moved. It is so frustrating. Can you just imagine if that was your family member and or even yourself? Really, just imagine going to your own trial, whether you're accused of something you did or you didn't do, and they've already made their mind up about you because HBO put a documentary out with a girl that's lying and has changed her story 10 times between all those documentaries. That would be a nightmare. And when they asked, juror number 13 indicated to the state that she believed that she could set aside things that she heard. Juror number 13 explained that the media blows things out of proportion and sometimes a lie doesn't give the truth or gives their perspectives of what the truth is, and that hearing the evidence in the courtroom would be more realistic than hearing the evidence from the newspaper or the media. Based on the evidence I've heard, it's reasonable to me that it could have happened the way that I had heard that it happened. Trial counsel failed to parse out with juror number 13 that whatever she'd heard in the media was not, in fact, evidence. 20 stated that he was a news hound and had seen much coverage on it. She went on to state, and I think when you do that, for me, it's impossible not to form some questions, but as one of you said, there will be new information and things to go to the media. So juror number 20 said yes when asked by the state if they understood that if chosen to serve, they would have to disregard entirely what they heard in the media and focus only on the evidence here. But that doesn't matter, because even if you're sitting there saying that you think you could or you believe you could, that doesn't mean that they actually can. And they've already been, essentially, the jury's already been poisoned. So there's literally no point in even trying to think that it's going to be a fair trial whatsoever, because they've already made up their mind. They've already been exposed to biased news coverage. It was a losing race. Like, he couldn't have won regardless. Even if you don't like him or you support Gypsy or whatever, he did not receive a fair trial whatsoever. He didn't even understand what was going on. And not only did they have those other jurors that were they had their mind made up, essentially, they didn't even ask or go into any questioning details about the other remaining jurors, about any biases that they may have already had to Nick Godejohn and all the stuff that was in the media during the trial and all these documentaries making him out to be this huge psycho monster, like how they fully intended it to be. Stacy Sullivan from Wisconsin, she was never asked, but had she been asked, she was a licensed professional counselor that worked at Waukesha County Jail as an LPC for 2.5 years. Would testify that at the time Nicholas was in the county jail, she was the only full-time mental health care worker there. She would testify that she was responsible for seeing most of the inmates at the jail. Ms. Sullivan would testify to the information contained in Nicholas's county jail medical mental health records. Recall Nicholas being at the jail, she would testify that he's very quiet, has a very flat affect, and that the officer told her that Nicholas was off to himself and was not like other inmates. She would testify that Nicholas was put into the mental health unit at his arrest due to the high-profile nature of his charges. Saw Nicholas 3 to 4 times while he was in the county jail. did Nicholas's initial intake, or she would have testified that it was evident to her that Nicholas did not understand the situation that he was in and was more concerned about asking her how his girlfriend was and if she was okay. She would testify that it was clear to her that Nicholas had no idea what the charges meant for himself and what he was facing and what it meant for him in the future. Nicholas was completely obsessed with how his girlfriend was doing. Miss Sullivan will testify that she also recalls meeting with Gypsy Rose Blanchard at the jail and that Gypsy did not once ask how Nicholas was doing or say anything about him at all. Miss Sullivan would testify that she never contacted by anyone from Nicholas's trial team prior to his trial. She would testify that if she had been contacted, she would have given the same information as I just read off. So even the mental health professionals that are in the jail that are observing Nicholas and working with Nicholas Godejohn, they're sitting there saying like he doesn't understand what's happening. He does not even fully grasp the situation that he's in. He's concerned about Gypsy, but then Gypsy on the other hand is not asked about him one single time, knowing that, oh, the love of her life is in jail. Never brings him up to anybody. Yet she was the one that was manipulated by Nick Godejohn, right? That's what we're all supposed to be believing here.
I don't know.
But that was a lie.
1000% manipulated him. And he had literally no defense against somebody that has the ability to manipulate like Gypsy Rose Blanchard. He did not stand a single chance. And she got what she needed out of him and then just discarded him and forgot about him. The only reason she even thinks about him now is whenever she's defending herself in the public and saying that he's a psychopath and he's there and he's going to stay there for the rest of his life because that's what he deserves. Even though that's not what she was telling the parole board whenever she was up for parole. She was saying that she felt like 2 lives were taken that night. It's funny how quickly she'll change her story whenever it comes to the situations that she's in, because she always shows her true colors. She knows he's not a psychopath. She knows he didn't do this on his own, and he literally couldn't have done it on his own because he didn't understand what it all entailed, how to commit something like this. He literally had to have step-by-step videos. That is why she sent the videos of her walking through the house, walking to the bed, pointing directly where he would need to go, because you can't just say, hey, I'm going to come in the house, like just imagine it in your mind what you're going to have to do. He can't grasp those little cues. He just is not able to do it. Yet he's the mastermind behind the whole thing. Honestly, it's such a tragic situation, and it's not even like unique to Nick Godejohn. There are so many people that have intellectual disabilities that have also found themselves in similar situations just like this. They may say things or falsely give confession. That is very, very common for people with intellectual disabilities to give a false confession. And by Nicholas Godejohn becoming fully and entirely consumed with Gypsy Rose Blanchard, he literally lived his entire life around Gypsy. Whenever she's threatening to take herself away, that causes Nicholas to go into a panic. So whenever he's being told, this is the only way we can be together, and if you don't do this for me, then we will never be together. He's going to take it as what she's literally saying. He's not going to be able to recognize that, well, maybe she won't mean till she's older or till something else happens. He's going to take it as what she's saying because that's just how his mind works. It's so sad that that happened to him. And I'm not going to downplay that it was not a horrible, horrific crime that he committed, because he did do that. Like, I'm not downplaying that whatsoever. But there are just so many things that go into this that it just makes it unfair to him. Now, do I think that he's 100% safe from this same thing happening again? I don't know. I can't fully say that because I feel like this situation is very tricky. I don't think he could be just given free release and to do whatever he wants to do. He would have to be heavily monitored and in some sort of facility that could actually meet the needs that he has, because regardless, he's not somebody that could be released and take care of themselves independently. But it honestly, she used him and just threw him away like a piece of trash, and she's off living her best life. She just doesn't even seem to care that she literally ruined so many people's lives, and she just wants to forget it. It's so 10 years ago. Honestly, that's who was released. That's who got off for, you know, being so abused and blah, 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 when we literally, it's not even true. He didn't have the ability to even understand what was happening. He has a 5th grade reading level, and they gave him the Miranda rights that have to have a 7th grade reading comprehension level. He did not receive a fair trial whatsoever. God. This is what's important. This is what the public really needs to understand whenever they see these documentaries and they've made Nicholas Godejohn out to be this certain way, so that way you envision him as some monster who has the dark side, like Gypsy likes to say. That's really not it. He was just a guy with autism, and he really wanted a relationship, and he was manipulated by somebody who was actually dark and twisted. And he took the fall for it, especially because he was a man. And a lot of the times, certain types of females will get off easier. That's just a fact. So Gypsy, being a small, petite girl, and white at that too, probably plays a part in it. Had this been any other situation, I think things would have went differently. But unfortunately, everybody was screwed over except for Gypsy, but yet she feels she was the most screwed over out of everybody. Because I need to touch on so many things that I just can't get to all in one video. So I'm gonna pause here. Please let me know what you guys think about this in the comments down below. As always, I want to hear your opinions. What do you think is the most outrageous part of this, or how Nick's rights were violated? Do you think it was the jury or the documentaries being aired first? Let me know what you guys think. As always, like I said earlier, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you can keep up with new videos coming out. Also, if you would like to do me a favor and share this video out so we can get some information to the public and share the actual truth of the story, actual facts that matter into the public, and not keep Gypsy's narrative alive and well, that would be awesome. I appreciate you guys sharing my videos. It helps me so much. Again, special thank you to Into the Weeds podcast for getting these documents, and not only that, but releasing them for everybody to see. It is incredibly kind of you to do that, and very generous for you to do that, and I appreciate that so much. So keep an eye out for new and upcoming videos that I've got coming out. Of course, I'll be doing a recap video on the new episode of Gypsy Rose Blanchard Life After Lockup as well. But until next time, I will see you guys later. Bye.